Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, March 10th, 2025, and today we're going to talk about testing soil moisture the simple way, veganic compost, and what are the easiest vegetables to grow. So let's do it. All right, well, happy Monday, everyone. We are officially saving daylight, I guess. I already did a whole segment about daylight saving this winter, but as I've said, the hour leap forward is not necessarily the one of the two time changes we actually want to save. But if we could just stop moving the clock twice a year, I would do my best not to complain. Don't care. I live off routine, so there is almost nothing I loathe more than a completely arbitrary time change. It's my nemesis. That and American cheese. Those two things. Just rid me of them. Indeed, though, happy Monday. I hope everyone had a nice weekend. It was lovely weather here. Our dear friends at Bel Air Blooms hosted a little farmer potluck on Saturday, which was great, honestly, hanging out with the farmer friends. You know how much I love that. Perfect weather for it as well. They have an awesome operation, too, so it's always fun to see flower farms because I know so little about what is happening. And again, I got to see a lot of my farming buddies there and meet some new folks. Kids ran around like crazy. It was very nice and very welcomed. Then on Sunday, I went to a celebration for a friend who had cancer and recently passed away. So it was an intense swing of emotions, sort of whiplashy kind of weekend. But it was good to see friends in both places and celebrate the one who couldn't be there. Anyway, changing gears with my usual adeptness. Recently, someone asked me what are some of the easiest vegetables to grow, and I found myself struggling to come up with a simple answer because of how many factors have to be taken into consideration. So naturally, I've decided to suck it up and try. First, the failure of most vegetables has less to do with the variety or type of vegetable chosen than it does the conditions into which that vegetable was planted. For instance, I would place radishes pretty high up on my list of crops that are relatively easy to grow, but if you plant them into weed seed-ridden soil, you will not likely get many, if any, radishes. Or if you plant them into fresh potting soil with no weeds in it, but you don't water the seeds or protect them from flea beetles or whatever, same result. So easiness is quite contextual. Or let's take lettuce, for instance. I think growing lettuce is easy enough in the spring. But in the summer, it's incredibly technical, or broccoli and cauliflower. These are wonderfully straightforward crops to grow if you live in a northern climate with cooler nights. In the heat of the South, it's a tough job, especially if you plant them too late in the spring or too early in the summer. So anyway, let's assume you have good, weed-free, healthy soil to work with. Here are my easiest crops to grow for most growers. I will be curious to see what you all would add. For directly seeded crops, radishes, turnips, arugula, and lettuce in the spring. As long as you have your soil free of weeds and you're willing to make sure those crops stay watered, these are relatively easy crops to grow. Anything in the brassica family, however, I recommend covering with insect netting or it will get ravaged by flea beetles, more than likely. And then other things later on into the late spring and into the summer. I don't think anything in the cucurbit family is particularly easy all the time, but zucchini and summer squash are definitely the easiest of those crops. Cucumbers can be great in the first season. They can be a lot harder once you have an established garden. Ditto melons. Sweet corn in the summer can actually be quite easy to grow as long as you cover it from the crows until it is a few inches tall, like put some row cover over it, then protect it with something when it's ready from raccoons, but otherwise relatively easy crop. Slow, but easy. For transplanted crops, head lettuce, onions, and potatoes are pretty high up there. Like all crops, they naturally have pests and issues, but in the early spring, the process is pretty straightforward and none of them require any sort of covering with insect netting or anything like that necessarily. Potatoes, you will have to hill them just to keep them from greening, but you can also use mulch. Relatively easy in terms of crop to grow, maybe like medium hard. Later in the spring, after your last chance of frost, transplanted peppers are an easy winner in a slightly warmer climate or inside of a high tunnel. The trellising, if you choose to do that, like plant them really close and trellis them, is relatively easy as well because it does not have to go quite as high as like a tomato plant. I mean, those can go over your head, so the trellising can get kind of tedious. Tomatoes in the field probably rank as like medium hard for me, only because the trellising for tomatoes takes consistent attention. If you are in a cooler climate, crops like Napa cabbage, tatsoi, and kohlrabi can be quite reliable. plentiful in the spring or in the fall. Those can be a little tougher in warmer climates, but the shorter season brassicas are easier and require less fussing over than the longer season ones like broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts. If you're further south or in a warmer climate, okra is a great option with very few pests. I mean, it's hard enough to pick okra. You can imagine all the pests are like, yeah, we're good. I also really love growing sweet potatoes if you can keep the deer out of the greens and cultivate them pretty well before the greens like kind of take over. Cilantro is a bit like lettuce, easy in the spring and fall, but technical as all get out in the summer to keep it from bolting. I also think fennel is an underrated easy crop to grow because it's a bit slow growing, but if you like fennel, it is relatively low on the pest front in the spring and fall. Basil is also another one I would put pretty high up there. As long as you get it, I would just get transplants and put them in well after your last chance of frost because they don't like any cold. Like 39 degrees is basically sub-zero weather for them. But basil even does well without a ton of rain. So like, in fact, it likes slightly drier climates. So a good crop in most gardens. Now, you may have noticed some, if not a lot, of missing members of the vegetable world in there, which we will save for discussing tomorrow. So subscribe or follow or whatever it is it's called on your preferred platform for the show. For now, though, I want to hear what you all think are the easiest crops to grow in your context, region, with your temperament, goals, and we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, how to measure soil moisture the lazy way. Awesome. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Sow Right Seeds. Sow Right Seeds is an heirloom seed company that offers fresh, high-quality, open-pollinated seeds. They have a great selection on their website of over 400 varieties, along with a planter's library with tips for growing. They offer cover crops and bulk packs of seed for sustainable home gardening. The instructions on the back of their packets have all the information you need to get started. Go to Sow Right Seeds, that's S-O-W, and use my discount code NOTILL for 15% off your order. That's sowrightseeds.com. All right, enjoy the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Kyle Putnam, who writes, quote, I don't think we've talked too much about irrigation yet, and I bet you could have a whole irrigation prep week headed into the spring. Do you know of any non-gimmicky but also not crazy expensive tools for testing soil moisture levels? I have a suspicion I may be overwatering, but getting away with it because my soils are so sandy, anything extra just drains away. Plants look great, but no need to be actually wasting water. I know there are amazing high-end tools out there, but I'm looking for something in the C's get degrees camp that just gets it done. End quote. Okay, so great question here, Kyle. First, I should have said this last week when I was talking about sprinklers. Perhaps the best and most accessible guides to just basic irrigation management are the ATTRA, A-T-T-R-A guides. I'll link the one on moisture in the show notes, and you can find the rest of the guides that they've done through that guide. Yep. There are several other guides out there like the NRCS irrigation guide as well, which I will also link in the show notes and is somewhat a bit more technical, I guess, than this ATTRA one. But the ATTRA Irrigator's Pocket Guide is really helpful and written more for humans and itself contains additional helpful resources. So anyway, I want to make sure that people are aware of those free resources when I remember to make sure that you are aware of them, which isn't always. So always check the comment section because lots of other people help me out in that regard. One of the things I love about that ATTRA guide, though, is that it gives you precisely what you're talking about here, Kyle, an incredibly lo-fi way to measure moisture, and it mostly revolves around tools that most of us already have, like your senses. Now, it's a many page long document, so I'm not going to detail it all here, but I'll cover some of the interesting points and some other things about measuring soil moisture, and you can decide if you want to dive further in. All right, this goes for any irrigation. Your soil type and soil health is going to have a huge say in not only moisture levels, but moisture availability. Like, I think it's sometimes confused with clay soil, but a clay soil with more moisture per square inch may actually have less plant available moisture than a sandy soil with less measurable moisture in it because the moisture is so tightly wound into the clay soil that the plants have a hard time extracting it, if I'm allowed a dramatic oversimplification. So in other words, a wetter feeling clay soil may actually have less available water than a drier feeling sandy soil. And on the soil health side, the higher your soil organic matter, the more plant available moisture a given soil will hold when needed and simultaneously release in excessive rains, like it'll let it drain through. Put another way, managing your soil health is managing your irrigation and moisture. They're the same thing. But that's not necessarily helpful for your question. So first, let's describe some of the ways to measure soil moisture with your senses, and then we'll talk about some basic tools. And I want to emphasize that soil moisture tools are not necessarily going to be all that much more precise, or they're going to be way more precise than any of us could use or is necessary for what we do. Think like researchers. So anyway, using your senses can be, in many ways, comparably reliable. According to the ATRA guide, in fact, quote, with practice and diligence, the feel and appearance method can be accurate enough for most irrigation management decisions, and many people say they can reliably come within 10% of actual moisture levels, end quote. So basically, take some very small samples throughout your field, wherever you're planning on planting. In the root zone area of the crops you grow, they recommend walnut-sized samples, preferably taken with a soil probe. The root zone for most of the crops that we're all going to be growing is like roughly in that like 8-inch range. So that will be the most important in terms of like measuring your soil moisture. You don't really need to go down like a foot or two. You really can just go down 4 to 8 inches to figure out how much moisture is there around where the majority of it is needed. Anyway, walnut-sized soil samples. And essentially for sandy soils, if you squeeze those little chunks of soil in your hand and free water forms on the surface in little droplets, you're at or probably even above available water capacity for that field. Like, don't irrigate. For denser soils, water may just drip out of it to give you that same indication, that it's probably oversaturated. And in fact, that ATRA guide has a nice little handy chart for you to follow. However, if you squeeze that sample and it leaves a nice moist impression on your hand, regardless of the soil type, that's a good sign that you're at probably 100% moisture capacity. For like 70 to 80% available water capacity, coarse sandy soils form a ball but tend to break up easily. Clays, they kind of ribbon out and don't form a ball. They will feel slick as well. Then you can kind of think of it like the clay and sand both form together less and less as they get drier and drier. So once you get past that, like they form a nice ball and they feel a little moist, period, then it starts to get drier and drier, and you're probably getting to closer to that 50% or lower soil moisture. If you can't form a ball at all with the sand and it flows through your fingers, or for the clay, it will feel really hard and cracked and maybe even dusty or powdery. At that point, you're between 0 and 25% available water capacity, which is far too low. You really don't want to go anywhere below 50%, with that 70 to 80% range being perhaps ideal. Now, I will add that if you do squeeze water out of it, also smell the sample. If it smells like manure, that's not a great sign, unless you're an anaerobic microbe. That smell is basically telling you that the water is not really draining very well in your area and is creating anaerobic, non-oxygen rich environments, which can lead to disease and dead plants. That anaerobic environment can be caused by a high water table or compaction, but if that's the case, you are, one, probably already seeing the issue in the plant growth, and two, you need to do something about the field drainage, which we have touched on a bit here, but we'll probably touch on more in the future, almost certainly. So if doing this just with your hands piqued your interest at all, check that guide out, and also the NRCS irrigation guide for more details. In terms of tools, if you want to go that route, the tool that probably makes the most sense, on the longer lasting side at least, is the tensiometer, especially for sandier, coarser soils. These are anywhere from $50 to $100. Their advantages are things like not needing batteries, lasting many years, not being affected by salinity, which other tools are, and being relatively simple to use. You can also make your own if you wish. There's lots of guides for how to do that online. There are other tools as well, but frankly, they are more complicated to set up or use, or affected by salinity, or not great for sand, and or not great for clay, or are more expensive or whatever. To be sure, those tools can be highly accurate and even feed into data loggers, which is fun, and you'd be able to track how your moisture changes over the season. And researchers utilize these types of tools for that exact reason. But for a farmer, the hand test is probably going to get you pretty far, if not as far as you need. Or if you just like something slightly more technical, the tensiometer is probably the best bet. Some of those other ones require things like calibration. So I would really, really investigate if you want to spend some money on like a true moisture content measurement tool. So anyway, for the vast majority of people listening to / watching this, your senses will be more than enough. Basically, does it ball up in your hand, a bit in your hand, and leave a little moisture on the palm of your hand and not smell like manure 8 or so inches down. Then you're good to go. If it feels dry and crumbly, I would irrigate until it doesn't. If you really want to dial in your water management, however, and you have really good irrigation equipment that can get you pretty exact applications of water, perhaps like in a tunnel on a very small acreage where absolutely every square foot has to be productive to make the amount of money you need to earn to keep farming, then consider investing in one of those or some of those tools if you want, and some very good irrigation. And of course, maintain your irrigation supplies really well to ensure you're getting the water delivery that you need. And read up a lot on irrigation for your soil type, because stop me if you've heard this before, context, it's still everything. Anyway, hopefully I helped a little bit there. Up next, we're going to take a quick break and then talk veganic compost. Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Agua Greenhouses. Agua Greenhouses has pioneered controlled environment agriculture since 1965, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver turnkey greenhouse solutions. Their unwavering mission is to support growers' success through innovation and expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Agua Greenhouses are engineered to withstand high wind and snow loads, providing optimal brightness, increased yields, rapid ROI, and long-lasting durability. With over 20,000 projects completed, they are more than a manufacturer. They are a trusted partner. Their structures foster sustainable, energy-efficient ecosystems that drive profitable, resilient agriculture. In 2025, Agua is introducing a new low-tech, high-tunnel model starting at just $2 per square foot, offering open field growers an accessible entry into controlled environment agriculture. Learn more at arnois.com. That's HARNOIS.com. All right, back to the show. Okay, so last week when I was talking about the 4 types of compost, someone offered veganic compost as another type of compost. Full disclosure, my wife and I are not vegans and not veganic farmers, but also a lot of the compost that we make here would be, if not straight up vegan, pretty dang close. And it's really freaking good compost. Now, to back up real quick, veganic production means no animal products like blood meals or bone meals, obviously, but also no animal manures, which includes in the compost itself. You may think that great compost requires manure, but what often gets overlooked about this is that animals have to be confined to collect that manure, right? Like if they're being rotationally grazed, there is no practical way to gather their manure. Plus, why would you? Spreading the manure out is what enriches the pasture in a rotational grazing system. And save for a handful of smaller scale examples like running chickens on top of a compost pile or housing animals on straw in a tunnel over winter, etc., most confined animals and end up needing dewormers and such that make it through their manure into the compost. So most accessible large quantities of manure are not always the greatest ingredients in the world anyway. I mean, especially if you take into consideration persistent herbicide contamination and that sort of stuff. And if you're ethically against confining animals, as a vegan might be, but as most of us presumably are anyway, then it's hard to be too enthusiastic about the manure anyway. To be sure, good compost can be made with meh manure, and bad or even highly contaminated composts can be made entirely without animal products. But I just thought this would be a fun topic to discuss and bring perspective to because, like I said, great compost can be made purely with plants. We do it every year. For instance, I've talked before about living pathways, probably exhaustively at this point, and how we mow them and collect the fodder from the paths to add to the compost pile. At the same time, we are also adding to that pile food scraps, greens for the tops of carrots maybe. Anytime we flip a bed and collect the plant material that goes into that all goes into the pile. Leaves and wood chips, kitchen scraps, which if you're vegan would be themselves vegan, and with adequate water and in the right balance, you can make an absolutely stellar compost with those ingredients, the nitrogen coming largely from the green stuff you added. Or maybe algae dredged from a pond, or old spent grains or hay or whatever. I have almost certainly made more veganic composts than animal-based compost, and the end results have been fantastic. One of my favorite composts is basically the one I give the recipe for in the Living Soil Handbook. It is effectively soak some cracked corn and soybeans overnight, what would be used generally for like chicken feed, but in this case is sort of a compost starter. Add a pinch of compost and a pinch of forest soil to that. Then let that heat up in the small pile, similar to the Korean natural farming method of making IMO. After several days, when it starts to cool down, I mix that in with some grass clippings from the pathways and whatever else I need to compost, and then just compost that like normal, turning a few times and keeping it moist until it cools down, and then cure it. The results are great and richly microbial, and as an organic farmer, you wouldn't have to worry about the composting regulations here because it doesn't contain any animal products. You still have to record it as an amendment, but that compost can be added whenever it's ready, even if you didn't turn it 5 times in a 15-day period, for instance, which is part of the organic certification standards when you use manure. So anyway, don't knock it until you rock it, and also show some love to your vegan friends. I mean, as epic vegetable eaters, it doesn't hurt to at least demonstrate to the vegan shoppers that you care a bit. You may, depending on your context, find that a compost that would qualify as veganic may actually work better for you anyway. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. Enormous thank you to all of our sponsors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No Till Growers. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another or sign up in the month of March, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Mirepoix Taste Buds. That's fun. Earl P. Duke, Randy, Jakers Acres. What's up, Jakers Acres? I love that name. And New Moon Rising Farm. So this is a guild of garden dog trainers, not to be confused with livestock guardian dog trainers, but people who train dogs to do various things, to be able to tell when your moisture level needs to gets too low in your soil, or when you have a disease coming on your plants, or when you have, they'll chase off rabbits and chase off squirrels. This seems like a really good idea. Why don't we do this with dogs? Someone said, and then they created a guild. Yep, that's how the story went, and we're very thankful for it in this imaginary world. Anyway, thanks for watching and/or listening. We will see you tomorrow. Bye.